Yeah. I'm curious, Dave, your experience with religion, if you're open to talking about this too much, were you ever a Christian yourself? Did you ever grow up in a religious home or
I grew up in a complete vacuum. Actually,
really?
I was never told anything religious whatsoever. So, quite honestly, it was very surreal when around age 5 or 6, because eventually I start getting around kids, and I start hearing about, oh, Jesus and this and that, and I'm just like, what are you what are you talking about? Like, I just,
Mm,
it was so fun. It's been very you know, interesting. It's been an interesting experience for me because I never have ever had to shed any kind of religious lens. So I've always seen it the same way, just sort of like, why do you believe that? Because, nobody ever told me that and it never got drilled into my head. So I've never had to shed a set of religious beliefs. So I've
mm,
always looked at others' religious beliefs with fascination, just kind of like,
yeah.
why do you believe that these myths are true? I don't really understand. Um, so yeah, I do want to applaud my parents for that. I think that they were very good in doing
Huh.
that.
So it sounds like
Um,
your experience growing up in a secular household was pretty positive then, in that
Certainly
sense.
in that regard, and in most
Okay.
regards, yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
I had a pretty
That's
good childhood, and yeah. Hmm.
well, because you hear the thing that says, "Oh, yeah, like you can be an atheist or you cannot believe, but don't let your kids do that. Don't let your kids decide." And it's like if I ever have kids, I'll let them figure their own way out.
Because
But
here's the thing,
yeah,
like, and
mm,
look, everybody can believe whatever they want, and I'm not saying like parents can't teach their kids their religion. I mean, look, as long as you're not doing great harm to society, I'm not gonna, like,
yeah,
you believe what you want. But I really do believe that telling your kids such and such is a sin, and like certain ways of sexuality is a sin, and you're going to go to hell. Or honestly, I think telling a child that hell exists at all is
yeah,
child abuse, quite
mm,
frankly. And
mm,
certainly telling them, like, never touch yourself, or like, homosexuality is wrong, is evil, or you can't have sex this way or that way or whatever. It's just, it goes into their head, and it's not good for the human psyche. And so I've grown up sort of without any of that baggage, and
mm,
so I'm pretty liberal. I'm very sex positive, and I don't have any hangups about sex, or and I don't have just sort of these overarching fears about the way I have to be.
yeah.
I'm very grateful for that. So
Yeah, like that's so interesting because I grew up religious and I grew up around people who were also religious. And I actually know several people now who are like me, who I grew up alongside, who have shed a lot of those beliefs. And there is a baggage that comes with that. Now,
yeah,
my family in particular is really great. I love my parents, and I don't think did anything wrong in that regard, but it's the system of beliefs really that can cause that abuse. If, like you said, if you really believe that your sexuality is a sin and you can't feel normal for what's a natural urge, for what's something that it is absolutely not shameful in any meaningful sense of the word,
right.
then it's
You're you're
harmful.
you're ruining one of the best parts of being a living human person.
Yeah, yeah,
Sexuality is wonderful.
and that's just one aspect of it. Obviously we've had lots of guests on this show who came from various religious traditions. If we're talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, if we're talking about Mormons, I mean, it gets even worse the more exclusive these kinds of ideas are to other ways of thinking, and why people have a hard time learning science, right? Because it's like this is a completely different way of observing and thinking about the world. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
actually
Yeah.
question, actually trying to gather knowledge rather than just implicitly believing stories that you're told as a child. Go figure.
Yeah. Yeah. Who would have thought? Who would have
Yeah.
thought? Well, we want to get some other calls here. So if anybody else wants to call in, we're trying to screen some folks. So we'll wait on that. But I guess we can keep talking about this topic because I get calls all the time, just like that first caller, about certainty. How we know things and how we figure out. I mean, that's kind of the tagline of the show. We talk about what people believe and why. And I get it. There's different methodologies, but what I have found in my experience with religious ways of thinking, faith-based ways of thinking, is there's just nothing reliable that's produced in thinking that way. And yeah, I get it. Scientists are wrong. Like, they're wrong a lot. Okay,
They're
like, it
people.
happens.
Yeah.
They're people, and it's a process, and they have self-interests, and they have motivations, and they have biases,
Biases. Sure.
and that goes
I
into
think
all kinds
scientists.
of research.
I think scientists tend to
Yeah.
be way less biased than non-scientists. But sure. I
Sure.
mean,
But the Dunning-Kruger effect can still apply with, I mean, like, you
yeah.
can have a PhD in maybe not physics. That's not a great example, but maybe you have a PhD in psychology and still deny the existence of, like, climate change
Well, of
because
course.
it's
Yeah.
just not your field. It's just not what you know.
Yeah,
So,
this is called a Nobel disease,
mm,
and I mean, I deal. So, for example, the debunk that I just posted on my channel today is about this guy who was a radiologist, and he was actually a very good radiologist. He was involved in advancements in MRI technology, so he was a good researcher, you know. But then he pivoted, and started saying all this ridiculous stuff about astrophysics and cosmology. I mean, this is what we're talking about. You know,
mm,
having having experience in one field, that got this is, they call it Nobel disease, sort of a thing. Not that he has a Nobel Prize, but there are Nobel Prize winning scientists who
mhm.
then in their later years spout pseudoscience and just ridiculous things. They sort of perceive themselves as being so brilliant. The
Yeah.
world has told them how brilliant they are, and
Yeah,
therefore
absolutely.
anything that they conjure must be brilliant, and so they
Yeah.
start to step into fields where they have no business. And so this guy
Yeah.
debunked today says things that are, I mean, they just like they're ignorant of things that I learned in astronomy 101 as a
Yeah.
freshman undergrad. Like, he'll be criticizing something, and I'm like, you don't even know what that word means. I mean, like, it's just
Yeah. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, right?
exactly, yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's the reason why you can any blue check marked person on Twitter can give awful takes about whatever they want because they think because a lot of people like them, they can just talk about whatever, like
yeah.
that's not it's not to say that, people don't that aren't experts in particular fields can't have valid takes about something. I'm not going to go that
Certainly,
far, but
but a very wise person who has a lot of expertise in one field, when speaking about even an adjacent field, let alone an unrelated field, will always, will always qualify their statements with something like, "This isn't my field, but this is how I see it," or "This is my opinion." It's just, yeah. I don't know.
yeah.
That's why I want to be sympathetic, because I know that it can be easy to slip into that mode psychologically.
Mhm.
If you're, propped up as an expert, you can get that way. I think that's why I'm very grateful for being a generalist, because I'm
Mhm.
constantly interfacing with what I don't know
Yeah.
all the time. I'm preparing content for my channel. Like, right now I'm preparing like immunology content, and so just a lot of different stuff that, I have a writer writing the content for me, and I read it, and I did not know any of it. It's all brand new knowledge to me. So, like, I'm just constantly reminded on a daily basis in preparing content for the channel how little I know. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
it helps me remain humble. But then at the same time, I can also revert back to my knowledge base and go, no, I know this. Like, this does
Yeah.
not fit with what I know, and this is very basic knowledge too. So,
Yeah,
goes both
people
ways.
ask like, how do you navigate the world, and how do you figure out because there's so many different sources of information. Like, there's different quality sources of information out there. Like, and if you can't explain the mechanics of something, right? Like, I would take a second look. Doesn't mean you're wrong, but it means you should take a second look. Like, especially if we're talking about
Yeah.
chemistry and things
Or
like that,
yeah,
right?
or just dial it back on the certainty.
Mhm.
Like, try to understand how manipulative people are on the internet. You know what I mean? People lie on the internet a lot. A lot, and
Yeah.
so if you just, I want people to be aware, or try to be aware as much as they can, about how much they are just buying a narrative, or just sort of believing something because it feels right, or they want it to be right. I
Mhm.
deal with this a lot with with the biomedical realm. Organic is just sort of a buzzword. Organic has to be better because it just
Right.
it goes against the mean men with their bad chemicals, and
Yes.
this is the fuzzy leaf
Yeah.
natural thing. Right?
Or
Yeah.
in a food sense too, like, oh, like the animal was raised organically, and
Mhm.
that's like, no, that just means they met a certain specific criteria that, and even that is really negligible to the overall existence of that animal's
Yeah.
life, and it's a whole thing. It's a whole
Yeah.
thing.
The word organic, as perceived by the public, is nearly meaningless. It really
Mm,
is. It really
yeah,
is. It means
yeah.
almost nothing.
Well,
Uh,
Dave, this is a call-in show. Do you want to talk to some more callers here?
happy to do so.